Hello and welcome to Chess Goblin. In this video, we'll be looking at a game played in the first round of the Madrid Chess Festival, currently happening in Spain. This game was played between Grandmaster Thomas Sosa from Argentina and International Master Levi Rosman, or better known as Gotham Chess. If you have not heard of Gotham Chess, he also has a YouTube channel. Pretty good channel. You should check that out if you have not already seen it before. But anyway, let's start with the game. And it starts off with e4, and then Levi plays a Caro-Kann. And this is something you should know when playing against Levi in chess, if ever you happen to play him in a game, that he really likes the Caro-Kann. And even though he's only 2300, he knows his opening theory like a grandmaster. He is very good at his opening theory, knows that very well, but his middle game and end game, has a tendency to blunder a little bit. But theory, he knows it very well, and his main opening that he talks about all the time is the Caro-Kann. And if I was playing against Levi, probably wouldn't play e4. But anyways, this is how it goes. And it goes into a Caro-Kann here. And then we see like a two-knight setup, and then very traditional, just bringing out the bishop with the idea of sacrificing it on this knight here. And then we see a trade-off of the knight. The queen comes out, and then we see this like diamond structure right here with the black pawns. Very traditional setup for the black pieces, and then often you would bring your knights kind of toward the center and back out to the side. Bring this bishop out often, and then we see this bishop out. And the idea of this bishop out right here is to prevent white's pawn from going to d4, and maybe have the future idea of your own black pawn going to d4 instead. And then we see white castle right away, and then Levi puts his knight in the center with future ideas of bringing it out maybe. And that's kind of a main idea with Caro-Kann, because since you have these pawns here in the center, you can't develop it a natural way here. Instead, you bring it out to the center, which is no problem. Great way to develop here. And then we see the queen coming over to hit this pawn here. And the only real good way to protect that, and that was another great reason he brought out this bishop earlier, is to then protect it here. And then we see a trade-off of pawns, and this bishop comes out. And we see this knight come back over here. An important thing to know about this knight, he couldn't go here, otherwise he's locking in the bishop here that was protecting this pawn. But instead, brings his knight to the center, and then we see Thomas rerouting his knight, attacking Levi's bishop, and he just brings it back. Very basic openings here, nothing super complicated. And then we see some aggressiveness on the king side. Levi's kicking his pawn forward, trying to kick back the Argentina's grandmaster's bishop. And then we see this strange move, g5. And a more traditional way of playing it is just going d6, having this strong black pawn chain right here. And then you can always castle this side, and it's pretty stable over here. But instead, Levi plays this aggressive move, g5. And this might look like free pawn after these trades go off. But after we see white capture the black pawn here, then Levi brings his rook over, creating a strong pin against white's queen. So then white can't capture the bishop, instead has to protect it with their pawn. And we see just a trade-off of bishops, and then the knight jumps in. The queen moves over, and now black has regained their lost pawn here. And it's even in the eval bars, it's even. The computer says it's fine for both people. But it looks a little bit uncomfortable for white here, with this strong attack going here with black's pieces. Maybe the future idea of bringing his knight over to build up more pressure against white's king that's sitting here. Even though he's castled, it looks a lot safer as black here. And then we see this weird move. And Thomas only thought about a minute and a half on it before playing it. traditional way of playing is maybe protecting, kind of building this pawn center here and protecting your center pawn here. But he plays a strange move, c4. And often the idea of c4 is to open up a line for like a bishop coming out on this white diagonal, but there isn't one there. And this is kind of a strange move. And there's only one move that black can do. They capture it. If they don't capture it, instead they play like an in-between move, like develop their knight. Then after we see like a trade of pawns here, now white will have a strong open file here, and black's king is a bit in trouble here. It just looks very uncomfortable. It's an uncomfortable position place, so he captures the pawn, and then white pushes the pawn again. Now Levy might be up a pawn, but here there is... It's kind of strange, because Levy thought more than a half hour on this move before playing here. And it's kind of he probably was calculating maybe some knight up lines here, but eventually he thought half an hour here. And although this may be a classical game, that's a lot of time to spend on one move. And now he's got half the time of white's pieces here. Thomas has half an hour more than Levy has here. And then we see the knight come in. And we just see a reroute of this knight. And then white brings over his bishop, or his rook. And then we just bring the king to safety down here. And this... And then this is the next move, trying to open up the line for the bishop here. And the computer said this was a miss. They said there was better moves here for white, but it seems like this computer is just like every move that's not like one of the top lines is a bad move. And this is an okay move. It opens up the line. It's not bad for white. It's an okay move. It's a move. After he does that, Levy sacrifices his queen. He sacrifices his queen here. Because if white takes, then we have this royal fork hitting the king, the rook, and the queen. And Levy then, because you can't take it back with his pawn, has to move. Thomas has to move his king. Levy picks up his queen. And now Levy's just up a piece. He's up a piece and completely winning this game. His rook's going to come down, and it's game over for Thomas here. So in this position, after Levy sacrificed his queen, Thomas knows that he can't take it, or he falls into this fork. And he can't, like, move his queen out over here because he loses it by the rook. He can't try to really escape because all these squares are covered. And he can't block with really a bishop because then the rook comes in, he loses it anyway. So he can't leave his king behind here and his queen in this file because Levy just takes his queen then. So Thomas has to move his king either to h2 or h1. And if we look at h1, it's bad because after a trade of queens, he's still down the bishop and game over for Thomas here. So he thinks on this move before playing h2, which is kind of an obvious move. Every other move lands him in deep waters. Terrible for him. He thinks 5 minutes before playing here, which was the only move. And then we see just Levy trading off the pieces. And very principled, very practical for Levy here. Because the endgame, although both people's pawn structures are quite scary, they're just terrifying to look at. There are so many just pawns floating all over the place, double stacked by both people. But if we count up the pawns, Levy has 6 pawns to Thomas's 5 pawns. And these 2 pawns right here, since they're on their double stacked, we'll count those as like 1.5. It's going to be very hard to push those with Levy's f-pawn on this side. So this is kind of a good idea for Levy here. Then he brings in his knight. Levy brings over his rook. And although these moves aren't like the top engine moves, he's just slowly trying to trade off pieces, bring his pieces over. And like if white trades off rooks, this kind of just helps Levy's pawn structure here. Now his pawns are connected. His rook's in the action. If he tries to move his knight, Levy picks up his rook in the back. And this is, although it's a mistake, it's not the top computer move, it's okay. And then we see this move from Thomas moving his white king down. Now he's kind of trying to tempt Levy here, because if Levy can get his knight to this f3 square here, he's forking all of Thomas's pieces. And he can get there in 2 moves if he goes knight here, here. And he's kind of trying to bait Levy to move there. Because if Levy moves here, then Thomas can trade off his rook. And say, for example, like, he takes back with his pawn to try to build up his pawn structure. Then Thomas can bring over his knight, attacking Levy's rook. After Levy like moves his rook down, then Thomas brings his knight in. And Levy tries to attack his knight maybe, but then Thomas can actually sacrifice his rook on Levy's knight here, because Levy can't even take back because this pawn is going to promote, and he can't try to sidestep it and get behind the pawn, because now Thomas has this fork hitting Levy's king and rook. And after he like tries to move his rook over, the king cannot ever catch this pawn. All these squares are guarded by the knight and the pawn, and it's just game over for Levy here. So Levy's got to be careful not to be tempted into trying to get this fork. It's not possible here. But he just plays basic approach, protecting his pawn here, slowly developing, and then Thomas captures his pawn. And although the computer hates this a lot, it's not terrible. There were better moves, but it's completely playable still. And now it's looking better. Now they both have 5 pawns on the board. If they head into an endgame, which Levy looks like he's trying to head there, it looks more drawable for Thomas. Then we see the rooks traded off, and it's looking... Then we see the knights traded off. And now he's going to try to push this pawn. But Levy's king can catch to it. Levy tries to bring his rook over. And now we see Levy's just blitzing moves here. He just blitzed his king over here. He's blitzing his rook over here, playing these moves instantly. And now we look at the clocks again. Levy has 10 minutes to Thomas's 13. Levy is catching up on the clock. And the way they paired these 2 people up in the tournament, they pair the strongest person right away against the weakest person. Levy is the weakest person in the tournament, and Thomas is the strongest person in the tournament. Far the clear favorite, but then there's also fan favorite, which a lot of people are rooting for, is Levy Rosman here. And right here, it's looking very good chances for Levy to win this game, beat a grandmaster. And now we see Thomas think 10 minutes on this move. He's only got 13 minutes. And 10 minutes on this move before he try to protect his pawns in the back. Levy brings his rook down. Now he's going to take the d7 pawn here. And Thomas's king is kind of out of no man's land over here. He's got to march him down here to try to stop this pawn, push his pawns down on the f-file to get some winning chances. And he cannot trade rooks here, because after that, Levy's king can just come over here, guard this f-file, protect his pawn, and 4 pawns on this side versus 2. Black wins this endgame every day. So we see that Thomas doesn't trade rooks. But after Levy captures Thomas's pawn, he just moves his king over. Levy protects his pawn. Now Levy's up a whole pawn here in this endgame. And then we see Thomas pushing his pawn. Levy bringing his king over. And then we see Levy trying to protect his pawn a little bit with a tactic here, because if Thomas takes it, Levy will take back his pawn. And this is not good for white here, because then we have all these 4 pawns here. And It's not good for white in this position. But instead we see Thomas push his pawn to f4 here, charging his other pawn down. And here's a little opening principle for you chess players. Often in an opening, you run out of moves. You don't want to run out of moves because this king wants to sit here for a while. It's good if the white king can sit here for a while on the square. But if ever the rooks get traded off, these pawns down here in the AB files, they will eventually run out of good moves. And you want to have the most amount of moves possible in the endgame. You run out of moves, then you turn into a Zugzwang position. And by slowly pushing this pawn to f3 and then f4, you are saving those moves for later in the game. It's not necessarily a blunder there, say, by moving, but it is not the strongest idea. It would have been a lot easier to play if he first played f3. And that's what the computer would have preferred too, I believe. Yeah. It would not have preferred f4. f3 is stronger. But this is what he decides to play anyway. And then we see Levy pushing the pawns over here. And now Thomas definitely cannot take the pawn, because now Levy just swipes this whole side over here. That's just terrible for Thomas. So instead, he pushes this pawn here. And now these endgame principles are just getting all broken. Now this may look like a okay gambit for Thomas, trying to like pull Levy's pawns out, bring his rook down, maybe try to swipe another pawn. It's very dangerous to play this way, and it's not recommended to just shove these pawns down right away. Very risky. And after he does that, Levy captures, and according to the eval bar, he's just completely winning. And when I was watching this game, I was watching this game live online, and I was like, Levy's going to win this game. He's completely winning here. Thomas is making big mistakes, and this endgame is just collapsing for him. And then we see Levy trying to trade off rooks with Thomas, because if he trades him off, white can never catch up to this pawn, and black's completely winning here. But of course, Thomas doesn't trade rooks. And now what's Levy doing? Is he going for repetition here? He's completely winning this endgame. And then it seems like he's going for repetition. We saw him repeat moves here. Like, although he's low on time, he's trying to maybe catch up the time, because there is a 30-second increment every move. This is not, he should stick to a plan and try to accomplish that plan. He captured the pawn here, and he should go for the win. If you want to become a grandmaster, which Levy's trying to do, you have to beat the grandmaster. You have to be better than this grandmaster to become it. You have to play the level you want to become. And you can't always just play for draws. You need to play for the win. And it seems like Levy can't make up his mind if he wants to go for the win or go for the draw. As somebody famous said, the saying, like, I can't remember, but it's, a bad plan is better than no plan at all. And that's what you have to have in chess. You have to have a plan. You can't just have no plan and go into it. You have to have long-term plans of what you want to do. And Levy just seems like he's changing his mind on stuff. Now he's going for repetition. And then he plays this. And right here, all his advantage is gone now. He's crumbling like a cracker. His just endgame is falling apart. He was doing solid in his opening. He knew his theory great. And then his middle game was pretty good too. Very principled, very practical. And then he's messing up this endgame. Because after he trades pawns, then he just brings his rook back. And now Thomas pushes his pawn here. And here's a very difficult position now for Levy to try to push now, because now this pawn's trapping Levy's king. Like, Levy has a coach here, but like, when I was playing chess a lot about 10, 12 years ago, when I was like first really getting into it, and I would play my older brother would trade pieces like his life depended on it. He wanted to get to an endgame immediately. He just kept trading pieces completely off. And at that time, I didn't know any opening theory. About the extent of my opening theory is I don't even believe I knew anything for an opening theory. Maybe a queen's gambit. I gambited the pawn, and that was the it. I just gambited the pawn, and now I'm down a pawn. That was the extent of my opening theory. And didn't really have great middle game ideas. But one thing I had a ton of experience with is endgames. And that built a strong endgame base for me. And it built some very good endgame instincts. And what Levy should have done here instead, like Levy, if you need a coach, I got you. Just if you're watching this, your endgame has a little bit to be desired. What you should have done is try to bring your king up. You want to bring the king up this way, you can try to bring it up this way, and the rook can never come over because you have this pawn here. And if Thomas then tries to bring his rook over to make like a pin here, and that's what he seems to really like to play, Thomas just bounces his rook back and forth between these two files. Now you can sacrifice this pawn. And Thomas can never bring his rook over, because after we bring our rook back, we trade off rooks, and these pawns, somebody's going to make it past here. Thomas cannot stop all these pawns. And if instead of bringing the rook over, he decides to trade off pawns here, then we push this pawn. And now Thomas's rook cannot come over, pin our rook to our king, and then we run our king up the side here, push this pawn and run our king up. We can kind of forget about this f pawn here for a while. This is the idea you should have had, Levy. Pushing your king up. The king is the most valuable piece almost in the endgame. You are the king in the endgame, and you want to be in this battle. You want to be controlling this battle, and there. You need to charge your king up and get there. That's the opening instincts. That's the in-game instincts you should have played, Levy. And why did he sacrifice this end pawn instead of this middle pawn like Levy did? In this position, it'll be way easier to pass these center file, the C file here. It's going to be way easier to pass these pawns here than the edge file. The edge file might be a little trapped up with this rook. In general, the edge file is an easier file to get a pass pawn. But in this position, this center file is going to be a lot easier for you, Levy, if you tried to pass a pawn on the center file. Instead of playing that, that would have made your game way easier, Levy. You can bring this. You could have brought your king up here, and the game would have been an easy endgame from there for you, Levy. And I was playing chess a lot, like 10, 12, 8 years ago. And then I gave it up for several years, and I picked it up about a year ago. And I've only been learning opening theory for the last couple months. Before that, I wasn't good with opening theory. I didn't try to memorize any solid opening theory, but I depended on my endgame. My endgame's the strongest part of my games. And Levy, you have great opening theory, but this endgame is... Both of these people, they're Grandmaster, International Master, playing not so great endgames. But this is what happens. And now the advantage that Levy had is completely gone. It's going to be harder to push these edge pawns. It would have been better if he sacked an edge pawn, because it's easier to run this king up the middle, because this square would be blocked. If you sack this pawn on the C file, now both these squares are blocked. That's the reason why you want to sack the edge pawn here, because now these squares are blocked for the king. It's going to be very difficult for the king to get through. And now you have to sack this pawn anyway. You're going to have to sack this A pawn. But now you didn't have to sack now you have to sack both pawns. If you did it the way I would have preferred, you would have only had to sack this C pawn here, or this A pawn. Now you sack the C pawn for no reason. You just made it harder on yourself. And it's, according to the eval bar, it's even. And I was watching this game, and he was just falling apart. And now, after seeing the blunders, the mistakes that Levy was making here, I was not sure that he's even going to win this game. It looked like he's just falling apart. Now White's bringing their king in. And now has Levy changed his mind? He's going back for repetition? Like, is he now going for a draw? After he sacked this pawn, now he's going for a draw? But then he changes his mind and he's now going for the win. He's got to march his king up here, chase this rook away, and shove this a-pawn up. If he's got any hope in this game, it's this a-pawn here. He wanted to save it before. Now he's got to use it. And now he's kind of in a tricky spot here. There's only one good move. It's king a5. He has to learn to sack pawns, and the right pawns this time. He doesn't. Now he gives a check. And now Levy's down a pawn, but he's got some hope now that his king is getting up here into the action to help push this a-pawn up. He brings his rook up. And he gives this check. And that was a good move here. It's important to know that he cannot capture this c4 pawn here, because now White can actually sacrifice it on this pawn, because then this endgame is completely winning for White. White's king will come down here, take the pawn, push these pawns on the f-file. They're completely winning. White can even, if Levy took Thomas's pawn on c4, White can even go on to this b-file here. And if he goes here, he just loses the rook. And if he goes in front of the rook, then he wins it either way. It's completely losing for Levy in this position. So Levy played the right move, where he brings his rook up, gives a check first, kicks White's king away, kicks Thomas's king away, and now he takes it. Gives a check. Now he's bringing his king up. And now this game is looking more promising for Levy. He was slipping there for a while. Now he's making some progress here. And now Thomas is making mistakes. This endgame was crazy to watch. It's a classical game, but they don't have a lot of time, but they had enough time not to try to make these kind of mistakes. Instead of moving his rook here, what Thomas had to do to try to go for a draw is he's got to bring like his rook over here. Try to maybe sack it on this pawn. And then go into a pawn endgame against Levy's rook. These were his chances here in this endgame. It's just terrible. After he moves it there, he gives up on this b1 square here. That's what he had to do if he wanted to save this game. Neither one of these people seem like they want to win. Like, they're trying to go for wins, but they're messing it up. These people are 2,500 level, 2,300 level. I'm not saying I'm an endgame genius, but these people aren't either. Levy, he's looking more promising now. And now he's running his king away. Levy's kind of he's figured out how to get this game now. This pawn, Levy's going to push to the end. And Thomas just can't stop it anymore. Levy's now figuring out this endgame. And now, here's an important move. It's important that Levy does not queen right away. Because if Thomas takes his queen and takes back with his rook, Thomas takes his pawn down here. Levy now cannot catch up to Thomas's pawns here. And then he's just going to push these pawns down. And as you can see, the eval bar is equal. And you cannot stop this pawn from queening. It's going to become a draw. It'll be something like that. It'll become a draw. So it's important back here that Levy does not queen right away. Levy finds the right move. Moving his rook out of the way. He's protecting this pawn here, but that pawn doesn't matter. This a-pawn's the important one. And now Thomas is trying to protect the pawn, hiding his rook behind it. And now Gotham finds out what to do, starts marching his king down toward the corner to chase the rook out of there and get the queen. He's figured it out. Thomas has to sacrifice his rook on the pawn. And this endgame. Now, Levy has time to catch this white pawn. The way it was before, with his king back here, he did not have time. But now with his king more forward, he's got time to catch the white pawn. And in this position, Thomas resigns. It started off with a great opening, a middle game, very practical, very basic, very principled. Quite a shaky endgame from both players, but after the rocks had fallen, Levy came out with a crown. Levy, you figured out the endgame, and you managed to get the win. If you're a good endgame coach, Levy, I gotcha, but you managed to get the win, you got the points, you got what you needed. If you have enjoyed this video, hit that like button down below, it really helps. And subscribe if you have not already done before. I hope to see you in the next video.